Eiffel Tower listeners, this week you're going to hear me interviewing Grant Rosenberg from the American Library in Paris. Now, it's basically right under the Eiffel Tower, so it's pretty cool to go down there and do a recording. We're obviously in a library, so if our voices sound quiet, you can guess why. But we have a big chat about books, loads of book recommendations in there, and you'll find out a little bit more about Paris and the American Library as well. And don't forget to hang around for a story from Corey Frye, which is also somehow linked to libraries. Now, if you think I sound really sick now, you'll have to forgive me for how sick I sound during the Corey story at the end, which was recorded right in the height of my sickness. So apologies in advance, but don't worry, I'm almost better. Enjoy the show.
Eiffel Tower with Oliver G.
So, is it Grant or Grant?
Grant.
Yeah? Although people would say Grant.
Well, when I pronounce my name in French, I say Grant, because that's how they say Cary Grant or Hugh Grant.
And you've been here 16 years.
16 years.
So you must speak good French.
Yeah, by now, but
that's presumptuous of me. But...
Yes, because I have met people who've been here 30 years,
yeah.
And they are still struggling with it. But the only reason that if I can say that I speak it decently, it's because I've lived here, because I have no natural ability to be able to learn the language. And if I was still in Chicago, where I'm from, I don't think that I would speak it at all in any functional way.
Sure.
It's simply because I was here and I was forced to use it and learn it.
So what do you think, Grant, is the cutoff for how long someone's been in Paris before you're like, come on, you should speak French by now?
Well, I don't want to be judgmental to say that there's any cutoff.
I think there must be a cutoff.
Well, I did a moment ago said, people have been here 30 years. I think that's kind of pushing it.
So if you've been here for 29 years and you don't speak a word of French, you're doing all right. 30 years, forget it.
I hope you would at least, after year 29, have some of the pleasantries down.
Yeah, right. And they're so important. It's so important. Anyhow, we didn't come to talk about pleasantries, although, I mean, it's as interesting as anything. But tell me a little bit about where we are. For someone who has never been here, what's the story here?
Well, we are inside the American Library in Paris. We've been around since 1920, so we'll be celebrating the centennial in a few years.
Hey, wow, that's exciting. How are you going to celebrate it?
Well, we're in the midst of deciding how we do that, but it'll be probably something pretty grand.
Yeah.
We have been in this location since 1964. We've had 5 other locations, including before this, where the Publicis drugstore is on the Champs-Élysées.
Okay, wow.
But we've been here since 64, recently renovated as well, last year. It's the largest collection of books in English on
Europe?
The continent. Yes.
Yeah, or in the continent.
On the continent of Europe.
Of course, there'll be bigger ones in England, right?
Yeah, on the continent. Yeah. Yes. And we're a lending library. It's a private library, but it essentially feels, to me at least, like a public library in the United States.
So for someone stupid like me who doesn't understand the difference between public and private library, can I just walk in as an Australian in Paris and borrow a book?
No, you have to be a member.
And how does one go about that?
So you would have to purchase a membership. The events that I run the evening cultural events, and those are free and open to the public, with a suggested donation of €10, but
sure.
But it's still free and open. So
let's be honest. How many people are giving the suggested donation?
I would say probably on an average night, maybe 70%.
That's pretty cool. And can you make a smaller or larger donation?
Yes, you can. Yeah, that's why it's suggested.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And there are some people who come to almost every single event we do, and they put down €10. Some put 20. Some put 5.
And do you have a cutoff for how many people you can get in here?
Yeah, there are fire code issues and that kind of thing, but generally we average, we can be up to about 100. Sometimes we've had a few more. Now it's a little different, although this is radio, but the fact that the reading room is enclosed, we now have a picture window, so with the sound that comes through the microphone to the outer area by the circulation desk, people who are overflow can watch inside and hear the sound on the speaker outside. Yeah. So we can have
like
more people.
Like a sports event.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes. Who are and you do mostly with authors, right?
I've been at the job for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years at the end of February, and I've tried to expand that. So we also have filmmakers, musicians who talk about their careers, and I've been trying to have more French authors, and it's a mix of novelists and nonfiction writers.
But the French guys and girls would have to do it in English. Yeah.
Yes. The way we see it, we haven't done anything with simultaneous translation or any kind of translation because people can see that anywhere in the city.
Sure.
And people come here, although the vast majority of people speak decent French, if not great French.
Yeah.
There are still people who use the library as a resource, having just arrived and don't speak the language yet. And we want to give them a night of culture in English. And
so we're doing a kind of similar thing, Grant, me and you, talking to people doing interesting things in France.
It's a good way of looking
It
at it.
must be strange for you to be on the opposite side of the microphone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
What's your favorite question to ask an author?
What their writing habits are and where they write and how they write. Anything revolving around that. Like the room that they're in, do they write directly on a computer? Have they ever composed a book like someone I know on their iPhone?
Oh, wow.
Do they write longhand and then transfer it? You know, what is that process like for people? Can they write in a hotel room and in a cafe, or do they have to be in a certain place?
Yeah.
Those kinds of craft questions always interest me.
And do they interest you because of the interesting answers you get, or are you just interested in how they... Like, does everyone seem to give a different answer? Or?
Generally, they do, yeah. And sometimes it's a bit cliche because it depends on age. Somebody who's 82 years old who did...
they're not writing on their iPhone?
They're not writing on their iPhones. But maybe one does, and that's what's so surprising. And it's interesting how people adapt, because some writers began writing on manual typewriters, the ones who are in their 70s, 80s. But then they have followed the times and then worked on an electric typewriter and then a clunky word processor and now, like an iPad. So to kind of go through that period, that transition of technology has been pretty interesting.
Has anyone ever answered that they write with, where you speak into a thing and it writes down the word? What's that called?
Not yet. Like a dictaphone?
Yeah, dictaphone. No. They're getting better though. I know, because a lot of interview journalists, you can almost use them now for an interview that you've done. It can...
To transcribe, like
pretty much.
Yeah. Well, most of the time when I am using my iPhone on the street, I'm dictating.
Yeah, right.
Rather than looking down at the screen and typing.
So who are some of the big hitters that you've had in here in terms of sell this event to the listeners here that want to come along to it?
Well, my highlight reel of who we've had over the past 5 years, the best one, always the one I come back to, is Jimmy Buffett.
Okay.
Which surprised a lot of people. First, that somebody so big, this American singer, who's kind of considered sort of kitschy and silly with, Cheeseburgers in Paradise and Parrot Head, that whole culture around that, turned out to be the most erudite, literary, well-spoken, funny, interesting, engaging storyteller. Wow. And also humble, and told these great stories about like playing piano at parties at Truman Capote's in Key West in the 1970s. And it was probably the greatest energy I've seen in that room before. We had about 100 people, and it's also the most viewed YouTube clip or interview that we've done.
So you put them all out on YouTube as well?
We do, and not all. We recorded them all, and we've got a bit of a backlog to get them up. But that one was done by Jimmy Buffett's own team, and they gave us the footage to also post for the library. And they had 2 cameras, they had good sound. And then he also performed a few songs at the end, too, in the library. So that was a real thrill. And what's funny is the week before that, we had Marianne Faithfull. So we had 2, kind of big musicians back-to-back, one week to the next. Wow. We've also had Gary Steingart, Jane Smiley. This past year we've had Colson Whitehead and Viet Nguyen, who just... both of them are Pulitzer Prize winners for fiction, and Viet had just won the MacArthur Genius Grant a few weeks ago. So it's an interesting mix of all-star, internationally known writers, and then also maybe some local ones, and then people who are doing things that are not very well known, but it's an interesting subject that interests our audience. And I think that's important because we're more than just a library. We're also a community center in English and a meeting place for people.
Do you find that it's mostly Americans that come in here?
No. Well,
why is it called the American Library?
Because I'm glad you asked that question. Because they founded the library with the collection of books sent to the American soldiers, doughboys, at the end of World War during World War I. That's the term for soldiers in World War I. Oh, right. American soldiers, at least. And so, rather than ship all those books back to the United States, that was part of a book drive to provide books for the soldiers. They decided to keep that and found a library. So, because it was for the American soldiers and it was American Library Association, etc., they called it the American Library. But in a sense, it is a misnomer because I think it's half of our membership are not American. Yeah, right. It's more precisely the Anglophone library in Paris. Yeah. And even so, we have a lot of French members too. People who are just Anglophiles, people who lived in English-speaking countries and want to preserve that with their families, or a lot of bicultural families.
Do you get people coming in and say, well, look, I'm... from New Zealand, can I still get a library card? Yeah.
We have a lot of people say, can I come to an event? I'm not American.
Really?
But if we're not exclusive.
And do you still have the books from the Doughboys?
We have some, but not as many as we probably would like. But on the other hand, they were also just the books of the era. So obviously some of them are great classics. Yeah. And maybe even like some of our copies of things like Moby Dick or something like that are. But most of them were also, the average mediocre book of 1915, 16, 17, 18.
Yeah, right.
So we don't have all those. But we do have a lot of interesting things in the collection because, for example, Marlene Dietrich, her entire collection was bequeathed to us by her son. So we have all of her books, and those are all noted. And
nice.
most interestingly, in some of her books, in her old age, she began to read biographies written about her. And she wrote in the margins. And
wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wrong. This is not true. I never liked cats. What are you talking about?
Yeah, wow.
Eddie Fisher wrote a biography or autobiography, and he sent it to her, and she wrote in the margins of the book he sent saying, something like, "Nice try, kid. We've never met."
That's cool. That's cool. Especially always write your own biography. That's what I say. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about authors in Paris. Are there any good ones?
Yes, there are.
Of course there are. I'm asking a stupid question.
Obviously in terms of renown, I mean, it's not like 1922
Right.
or 62 for that matter. There are local authors who are involved with the library or involved with Shakespeare and Company, for example, who are here a lot. We have Jake Lamar. On our Writers' Council, we have Diane Johnson, who wrote Le Divorce.
Yeah. What about if I said, imagine you step outside of your job for a second and you're just a reader, and I come to you and I say, I'm looking to read some books written by people living in France. What would you recommend to me? And this is a hint of the quickfire round coming up. We'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, people who are living... I'm going to kind of fudge my answer a little and talk about some books that were written in this library, in that reading room.
That is very much fudging the answer.
But they may not be living in Paris at this moment, but they do in the long term, or were visiting for a long period of time.
Okay,
and
I'll let you get away with it, but I will not be so kind later.
Okay, Dino Mengestu, who's written several books, including All Their Names, How to Read the Air. He's very good. Yeah. He's also spoken here over several years. And there's an author, Steve Toltz, who is Australian.
Yeah, right.
And he wrote a book called Fraction of the Whole, and most recently
I've read it.
Called
it was really good.
It really is.
I remember one line in it that stuck with me. It wasn't even...
What's that?
It was just 6 words in a row. It was like something like, he had a laughter that sounded like denim being ripped. Oh. And I just remember reading that and being like, whoa, that's a new one.
Yeah, it's a good line.
That was a good book.
It was. And so he wrote his second book, Quicksand, which I have not read yet, but he wrote a good chunk of here because he was spending the year in Paris, 2015.
Wow.
So what I would love to do is have that in our collection, where it's noted in the book that this book was written in the reading room.
Good idea. Let's take a step outside the library, because you're in a fantastic... not literally. We can stay in this soundproof room, which is quite excellent. But you're in such an amazing location. You're pretty much in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, literally. It's... What is it, like 100 meters away?
Something like that, yeah. I've said that too. I've said we're literally in the shadow, depending on where the sun is.
Yeah. How's that for the commute to work? Do you get sick of it?
No, I don't get sick of it. There are things that I know more now about the 7th. I don't live in the 7th. It's a very clean and nice arrondissement. There's also a lot of... it obviously has a lot of tourists because they're at the Eiffel Tower or nearby. Which may give it a different feel than being in the 12th or the 13th. But then just as somebody who's lived here for so long, there are different things I like about different arrondissements. Mm. Yes.
I mean, what else have you got around here? The Seine River is but a stone's throw away.
Yes.
You know that fancy door on Avenue Rap?
Yes, right across the street.
Yeah, that's also... Is that just there?
It's right over there. Yeah,
100 meters or so?
I will say that my favorite view of the Eiffel Tower is not on our street, which is Rue du Général Camus, but is on Rue Montessuie, which is the one just north of us toward the river. And at the corner of Avenue Rap and Rue Montessuie, looking toward the Eiffel Tower. It's really the most fantastic view because you see the base and it's on an angle. And it always seemed to me that of the Eiffel Tower, the base, the bottom part of the structure is the most interesting, not the top.
Do you think, I sometimes wonder, I'm going to go there and take a picture after this conversation, but do you think that some of these photographers who come and take such brilliant pictures of the Eiffel Tower, do you think they know these secrets ahead of time? Or do you think they literally, I always wonder, do massive circles around it
I don't know.
At varying diameters of it or radius?
I think you have to really probably study it because it's probably been photographed more than anything else probably on the continent.
Right.
And a lot of those pictures are boring. I find that if you're if you're looking down the Champ de Mars and it's just the Eiffel Tower straight ahead, I find that to be, as I was saying, less interesting than from other angles.
Why is it more interesting on other angles?
But I think what you know, if it's talking about the structure itself, it's more. I think what makes it so interesting visually is more in the first, you know, in the base and a bit above that. And even when you see it in aerial views, it just seems much more impressive than just looking at it straight from, like by École Militaire, looking straight down across the Champ de Mars.
My favorite ones are where they get they find the angle where the branches are everywhere, and yet it looks like it's going up between all the branches because they've just found the exact right location.
Well, yeah, there's certainly geometry at play in it.
Yeah, right. I tend to unfollow the social media accounts that post too many pictures of it, though. You can have too much of it on your social media feed.
Yeah, you can, and I'm kind of right now being a little reticent to you know, obviously say anything critical, but certainly it is. I don't get sick of being here, and even after 16 years, I still have a sense of awe about things about the city that really impress me.
How long have you been working in this building?
In this building, almost 5 years.
And how many times have you been up the Eiffel Tower in the past 5 years?
I've never been up to the top of the Eiffel Tower.
Why is that? I heard
I
other people like this before too.
Yeah, I want to just leave it as something I'll do eventually. You know, to always have one more thing, I suppose. I've been to the top of Tour Montparnasse at least 5-6 times.
Some say the better view of Paris.
And they say usually because it doesn't include the view of the Tour Montparnasse. But I think that was very interesting to be up there. But for some reason, I wasn't interested in you know, there's always a line outside the Eiffel Tower, and I just at some point a few years in, I said, you know, I kind of like the idea that there's always something major that I haven't done yet. But I've been to it at least 100 times over 16 years. In front of it, I've been to it. I just haven't gone up any you know, any sense.
Looking directly up its anus, some people say.
Yeah. Yes, that's
right. You know, you can't just walk through it anymore underneath. They've got all the.
I know.
What's all that about?
Security.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think it's time for the quickfire round.
All right.
So for those who've never heard this show before, including yourself, what I'm going to do is ask you 5 questions really quickly. I haven't planned them. They're just going to come as the conversation goes. You're not allowed to think.
Okay.
That's the only rule. Okay?
We'll see how much of a psychological profile that builds.
What do you see when I hold up this image? No. Okay, we'll start easy. Relatively easy.
All right.
Tell me one book that I have to read that's about Paris.
I don't want to say A Movable Feast.
Then don't say it.
I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to think about that during the next questions.
No one's ever asked if they could come back.
Wow.
If we're 45 episodes in or something, okay, we can come back, but if we don't come back, you've said
okay, I've got it. Okay, I know, but it's only partially about Paris.
Okay.
James Salter, Sport and a Pastime.
What's it called? A
Sport and a Pastime.
Oh, I haven't heard of that one. And why is it so good?
Because it's a beautifully written book about young people in France, American and French. He has a really, really impressive approach to writing about eroticism.
Okay.
And I, you know, I've talked to many people about it. For a lot of people who know Paris or don't, or France in general, because it also takes place in other places, including a town called Autun. It's kind of a seminal book of literature. It was written, I believe, in '65.
All right.
And
okay.
Yeah, it's
that
very
was
good.
Just the year after the American Library changed location.
Yes.
If I remember correctly.
All
right, second question. We'll keep book theme.
Okay.
Best place to buy a book in Paris in English?
I can't answer this fast, but I've got different answers for why. So Galignani, because I think it's the most beautiful bookstore.
You know, I've never been there. Where is that?
It's on Rue de Rivoli, and they have books in English and French. It's a beautiful bookstore.
Oh, no, I have been in there before. Yeah, that's cool. That one.
And obviously, also Shakespeare Company, because itself is very, very beautiful.
You see what you've done there is you've given 2.
I know. And I'm going to also say the Abbey Bookshop.
You can just list them all if you want.
Which is technically Canadian.
Right.
Well, but you know, it's important because there's so few bookstores now. I mean, when I've been here long enough to be able to say in my day kind of thing, but when I first arrived, and that was only the very first time I came, traveling was in 1996. I moved here at the end of 2001. And in 1996, you had still Village Voice, Tea and Tattered Pages, a mix of used and new, these bookstores. A couple years later, there was one called the Red Wheelbarrow, and they're now gone. And so
isn't that a poem, the Red Wheelbarrow?
Yes.
Who was that?
Sylvia. Say William Carlos Williams.
Oh yeah, I don't know. It'd be in the pages here somewhere.
Well, the person who would know that would be my colleague Abigail Altman, who works at the library now, but used to co-run the Red Wheelbarrow.
Okay.
So she will, if she hears this, kind of say, "Oh, you know which poem that's from."
Yeah, that's good. It gives people a reason to write. We like seeing comments. That's something I'll bring up now. We love seeing your comments. So if you've got a comment on any of the things we said, write it below. We might read it out one time. On with the quickfire round. If you had to spend, I've asked this before on the show, but if you had to spend an entire day in one arrondissement, which would it be?
10th.
Oh, why?
I like the feeling of that area. I like the way that it goes up toward the canal a little bit. Some of my favorite restaurants are there with natural and biodynamic wines.
Oh, yeah?
And it also happens to have, I think, the most beautiful Hôtel de Ville of the
Town
city.
hall, yeah,
Of the...
The 10th town hall, where is that?
It looks a lot like the main one for the entire city.
That is my favorite building in the city.
So this one is very similar in architecture.
Where is it in the town?
It is, I think it's on Strasbourg.
Yeah, I know where it is, next to the fire station. There's a fire station.
I don't remember there's a fire station there, but it's north on its way, like if you go up toward the, I guess, Gare de l'Est.
Yeah, so it's right near Chateau d'Eau.
Yes, right by Chateau d'Eau.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a fire station on the back. I know, because I take that route home sometimes.
And also the views that you have of like the Porte Saint-Martin and all the gates outside, the original gates outside of Paris. You can see them. Obviously, you can see them in the 9th as well. But there's something about the 10th and the variety of the neighborhood and diversity of the neighborhood that I like a lot.
Okay, out of the books and into the movies, can you recommend me a French film? I've never watched any French film. That's not true. But let's say, what would you recommend to me?
Well, I would always say 400 Blows.
400 Blows.
Truffaut's first film.
Right.
And then just beyond that, like The Beat That My Heart Skipped by Jacques Audiard.
You've got a habit of giving several answers.
And this is a very slow lightning round. But, one film, I would say, if it has to be one, I would say 400 Blows.
Okay. When was that? That's quite an old one, right?
1959.
Yeah, okay. Okay, and one more question. Let's see. Can you recommend a bar? A bar in the city? I think your iPhone just fell out your pocket. Go on with the show.
A bar in the city.
Cool bar. Let's say you got some friends visiting. You want to show them a good time.
Yes. I would say the Garde-Robe, which is in the first on Rue de l'Arbre Sec. It's a natural wine bar. And they've got tables and chairs, actually kind of high ones outside and nice tables inside. And they have the wines that I like, and it's a very convivial atmosphere.
You're a big fan of the bio wines.
Biodynamic.
What does biodynamic mean?
Okay, well, natural or biodynamic, but specifically that, the general idea is that there's as little intervention in the vinification process. So they don't add sulfites, or very, very little, or have only naturally occurring sulfites. And the idea is that every wine's a little different. There's no like oak chips, it's not a very formatted wine. Some people like wine because they say this is what it's going to taste like when I open it. Natural wines, which are a little bit more expensive, but they're usually manually, every aspect is done manually. This sounds almost silly, and I hesitate to say it, but I wasn't really a big fan of wine, and even when I moved here. And then one day I had a first glass of natural wine, and it was like an epiphany for me because I understood what people meant.
Right.
I said, oh, this is what people mean when they talk about what you can taste. Like I said, this is what terroir is. I get it now. And I would say that once you start having these wines, it's hard to go back to something that's a bit more typical and formatted. It may not be a bad one. Kind of, yes. And also I like the idea of demystifying wine, that it's not like some sort of fancy pants thing.
Yeah.
That it's still, it's even a working class drink here. It's what people drink. And it's, that you don't have to have a chateau on the label. I mean, it can just be some goofy picture of a cow or something. But if it's a great tasting wine, and it's done by a guy, or like a husband and wife, and they make, maybe 2,000 bottles the entire year. And they're the ones who come from, let's say, from the Loire and deliver it themselves to the restaurants, Yeah. There's something about that whole culture around these wines in the restaurants that have them and the cavistes, the wine cellars that have them, that I always find very attractive.
Well, you've given me something to try. And I think we can wrap it up on that note. The unique biodynamic wines, unique just like all the books in your library.
I didn't even get a chance to explain biodynamic. That's a whole nother level of things.
It's a whole nother show. Maybe I'll have you on the show. I've been meaning to do a show about wine.
Well, we are actually having an event with Alice Fearing, who wrote about natural wines, on February 7th.
There you go. Okay, well, maybe we'll see you there. And listeners, if you're in Paris, it's a good chance to come and meet Grant and the whole team here at the American Library. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now I'm here with Corey Frye.
It's a Corey story.
Hey man, how's it going?
Pretty well. How are you?
Good. Are you still sick?
A little bit better than last time. Did you manage to link a story to libraries?
I did, yeah, because when I think of libraries, I think of one particular story that's really, really exciting. I love Paris and all these sort of, it's like a great novel, and this is an example of that. There's something called La Bibliothèque Nationale. It's on the Rue de Richelieu. It's right next to Palais Royal. It's essentially one of the oldest libraries in Paris. And when Napoleon was doing his thing, Napoleon Bonaparte, he's taking over all these parts of the world. When he invaded Egypt, he famously grabbed a couple of mummies, these mummified pharaohs, and he actually brought them and sent them back to Paris as part of his conquest. And they popped them in a display area in the Bibliothèque Nationale. The story goes that the humid air near the Seine River in the center of Paris was too sort of caustic for these pharaohs that were a couple thousand years old, and they started to deteriorate and rot. So the employees of the library, eventually after Napoleon took off and fell from power, they took those mummies and they popped them in the garden. They buried them in the garden of this library. Well, then some time passes, and in 1830, there's another revolution that kicks off. Not the French Revolution, but another one called Les Trois Glorieuses. And the guys who died, the revolutionaries, were buried in the same garden of the library, the bibliothèque. So then fast forward another decade, it's 1840, and you know La Bastille, the area of the Bastille with that big green column. That column was not erected for the French Revolution. It was erected for this smaller revolution of 1830. So long story short, they go to the burial ground, the library's garden, and they dig up all those soldiers, the revolutionaries, and pop them underneath the column of La Bastille. But then years go by, and the workers are down there, and all of a sudden they're renovating and restoring the area. They do a body count, and they find that there are 2 or 3 extra bodies that actually aren't supposed to be down there. And so it turns out that it's probably the mummies that Napoleon had sent over from Egypt. So the local legend says that there are a couple of mummies buried underneath the column of the Bastille.
Wow.
And to finish up that story, what's wild is that there's also a rumor that one of those mummies was Cleopatra herself, that Napoleon found Cleopatra's remains, secretly sort of kept it all under his hat, so to speak. He had a lot of hats, Napoleon. And then popped it in the library. He fell from power. She got buried in the garden and then ended up under La Bastille.
Wow.
So that is my story.
But before we go, you know what I was thinking the other day? We always say follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. We both tweet, though.
I've been known to tweet.
You're a
the
Twitterer.
tweet.
But for the first, I've never on this show told people to follow on Twitter.
That's a grave error.
I'm doing it now.
Okay.
At Oliver G23. GEE23. Here's a little known fact about it before we get into your Twitter. If you tweet any episode or any story I've written, I'll retweet you to like 4,000 people because I just don't do it very much. But what's your Twitter?
My Twitter is at French_Frye.
That's for all the Twitter followers out there. We're thinking of you guys. And we're not even going to tell you where to find us on Facebook and stuff. Forget it. All right, Corey, thanks for coming in. Another story from you next week?
Absolutely. I'll see you then.
Eiffel Tower with Oliver G.